Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the June astrology forecast. First off, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons who have been so supportive. If you would like to become a patron and get access to these forecasts early, as well as a host of other astrological and astromagical information, go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin. Now let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about May, since it's important to understand where we're coming from. So there is a sense, I think, in May that there are some big changes afoot. We had a relatively quiet early spring, and with May and then definitely June, we're going to get into some pretty heavy, large pieces moving kind of time of the year. In May, Jupiter also entered his domicile Pisces, which gave us a little bit of a preview of 2022, which is the year when he'll spend most of that year in Pisces. So there is a sense that we're on a little bit of an accelerated timeline here, but also a sense that important things are happening once again. Now, the first 10 days of June is influenced by the May 26th eclipse at 5 Sagittarius, and Jupiter is the ruler of that eclipse. Now, that eclipse really gives us a sense that we have an intense awareness, I think, of helping other people and of the removal of barriers. Certainly in the US, we've seen a very fast reopening of everything as COVID cases have dropped following the introduction of the vaccine. Now, Jupiter, who rules this particular eclipse, is a key planet in our Aries ingress this year, and the US resonates to the Gemini-Sagittarius polarity. So this eclipse, I think, is particularly important and marks a particularly key milestone in the United States, in the US narrative. I think that we are going to see a fair amount of kind of like social tumult, certainly violence. Sagittarius is a pretty violent sign. I always say it's the only sign that has a weapon as part of its symbol. And it certainly has to do with things like shooting and military activity, all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some of that going into June. And in fact, maybe the echoes will persist a bit longer because the US resonates to that Gemini-Sagittarius polarity so strongly. Now let's talk about June. So week 1 is fairly active. We have June 1st, Mercury has his evening set at 24 degrees Gemini, and he is retrograde. So evening set means that he enters the sun's beams. He mutually applies to a conjunction with the sun, essentially. And so he enters a period of invisibility as the sun overshadows or overbrightens Mercury. So all mercurial matters like business and certainly especially communication, media, education, because Mercury is in Gemini, are all entering a phase of hidden, or what I would say inner, purification and transformation. So this could apply to schools, students, as well as children in general, because children are, for the large part, mercurial. So now is a really good time to plan or negotiate behind the scenes. All will be revealed later in June as Mercury emerges from the sun's rays. But for now, things are getting kind of quiet, and there is activity, but it's all happening sort of under the scenes, under wraps. June 2nd, Venus will enter Cancer, and she is the Cancer triplicity ruler by day. And in general, she has an affinity with this feminine moon-ruled sign. So often what happens when Venus passes through Cancer is women are in the public eye and are generally seen in a favorable light. It's a very artistic placement. Often artistic achievements, musical, visual, whatever, come into prominence when Venus passes through Cancer. June 3rd, Venus will trine Jupiter at 1 degree Cancer and 1 degree Pisces, which is a lovely combination. It has mutual reception by exaltation. So really, this combination just asks for some kind of artistic, spiritual, or other act of kindness. This aspect, of course, won't last long. It's really just active for a day or two, but it has a certain protective and positive energy. So it's a wonderful day to, take some action that you would like to have blessed by Venus and Jupiter. Now, June 5th, we get sort of the opposite experience when Mars opposes Pluto at 26 Cancer and 26 Capricorn. This is a moment of power games, violence, accidents, and fatalities. The last Mars-Pluto opposition, just for a sense of perspective, was June 19th, 2019, so 2 years ago. And interestingly, Donald Trump officially announced his re-election campaign the day before that transit. He had filed the papers long before then, but this is when he gave a speech announcing it. So is that a successful aspect? Probably not. That same day, Mercury will also square Neptune. And I think that tends to add a bit of that mass casualty energy. So this could be a day of, I think, bad news, like I said, violence, accidents, things like that. Certainly it's not a day that you would want to, take that first skydiving trip, for example. Now, week 2 of June 10th, the Sun and Mercury conjoin in that inferior conjunction at 20 Gemini. It's inferior because Mercury is retrograde. And Mercury at this point is halfway through his purification. So of course he's still hidden by the sun's rays, and he is going to be Cazimi today, although he is going to be a little bit weaker because he is retrograde. So this is clearly not yet the right moment to make things public, but rather keep refining them until they are ready to emerge into the public eye, just like Mercury from the sun's rays in a few days. Now that same day, June 10th, we have an annular solar eclipse at 19 Gemini. Its ruler is going to be Mercury, who is also in Gemini, closely conjoining the eclipse. And again, this is an important eclipse for Gemini countries, especially those where that eclipse is visible, and that will include the United States. So I think it's going to be a period of confusion, of intense movement. I've noticed that eclipses tend to add drama, certainly in the public eye, and if they're doing something in your natal chart, sometimes they will add a little bit of short-lived drama to your life as well. Although primarily the role of eclipses is group energy, it's, communal energy, more so than the individual impact. I think that around this time, communications and negotiations will be flying back and forth at really high intensity. But it's also a little bit hard to conclude these talks, because Mercury is retrograde. I think there is a very high potential for unexpected reversals. And also there is a sense that whatever may be agreed now is not going to last for the long term. Now, June 11th, Mars will enter Leo, and he will be there until late July. Now, Mars in Leo is certainly a lot less humiliated than when he is in his fall in Cancer. Although he's not especially successful here either. He's still peregrine in most of Leo, and I think what we'll see is a lot of ostentatious shows of strength and full-on roaring. This is really a period of making sort of power moves, but it's not necessarily something that will have a tremendous impact unless it's backed up by other astrological aspects. Certainly, if you're on the receiving end of this kind of energy, now is not the time to be intimidated, and just see this for the posturing that it is. Now in week 3, June 14th, we get our second aspect of Saturn retrograde squaring Uranus at 13 Aquarius and 13 Taurus. This is the second aspect of the 3 this year, with the last one happening in December. And you may remember how we talked about this aspect representing the COVID pandemic, but also this larger conflict between anarchy on the one side of the spectrum and authoritarianism on the other side of the spectrum. And I think that this energy is really playing out worldwide, but certain places will feel it very intensely because of the Aquarius-Taurus correlation. Russia, interestingly, is historically associated with Aquarius, but also Taurus, which I didn't know. What's interesting is that I think this aspect represents a very primal struggle, really in any social group. And so I think that this aspect in June will make it appear as though the forces of disruption are going to be victorious, because Saturn, who rules order and restrictions, is retrograde, so he is on the back foot. Uranus, which is the force of primal anarchy, as I would call it, is direct. But by December, it will be the opposite, and Saturn will ultimately prevail. So June is an important milestone in the 2021 story. It really represents the second act in a 3-part play, and I think that we'll see a lot of activity between now and December when we'll see the final denouement, the final development of this particular story. Now, June 15th, we'll have Jupiter entering his retrograde station, and that is 5 days long. Most people don't realize that stations vary depending on which planet you're talking about. And for Jupiter, when he goes retrograde, that station is actually 5 days. So you will start to feel that stationary energy well before his actual stationary date. Now, June 19th, Mercury will have his morning rise at 16 Gemini, so he finally emerges out of the sun's rays. So it's a great opportunity to bring mercurial projects and moves into the light. Now, he is still retrograde, but he steps into the light now, and we can all see that what he's been planning this whole time. So I think a lot of these plans don't get launched until he goes direct, but now we can see what he's been plotting and what the map is going to look like. Now, week 4, June 20th, the sun will enter Cancer, and this is the official start of summer, which represents the beginning of the summer season, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere. Whenever the sun enters one of the cardinal signs, it's a significant chart for the world. It's always set in the capital of the country that you may be examining or the city, and it tells us something of what we can expect for this season. Now, I am giving an online talk about the U.S. Cancer Ingress for the Chicago NCGR chapter. This is in early June, so you can go on their website and sign up for it. Of course, it's on Zoom. Now, June 20th, Jupiter will turn retrograde at 2 degrees Pisces, and he will remain so until mid-October. He will remain retrograde. Now, what this means is that Jupiter's concerns will be less prominent at this time, with Jupiter in quasi-hibernation. My guess is that in the political and financial spheres, we will see significant legislation for things like infrastructure in the financial world only once Jupiter really goes direct. So I think the next 4 years, things are going to be put on the back burner. They may be worked on in the background, but they're really not going to be ready for their final approval, being signed into law and things like that until Jupiter stations direct in October. Now, week 5, June 22nd, Mercury will station direct at 16 Gemini. And so all those mercurial concerns and projects that we've been working on, they are now ready to move forward. A couple days later, June 24th, the full moon will occur at 3 degrees Capricorn. Now, Saturn is the ruler of this lunation, and he is averse to the lunation. He's not making a major aspect to it. He's also retrograde in Aquarius and opposes Mars in Leo. So this feeds into the next 2 weeks' theme of boundaries. And even though boundaries and restrictions are there, they are not especially visible for the next couple of weeks. The other narrative I think that we'll see for, late June, early July is that boundaries will be tested by Mars because of that Mars-Saturn opposition. That Saturn square Uranus narrative that makes it seem like anarchy is winning will seem more credible in late June, early July. It's just a deception, it's just a temporary phase, but it's going to seem that way with this full moon. June 26th, Venus will enter Leo, and I think this is just glorious, showy, extra fun. In places with high vaccination rates or that are reopening, like the US, this kicks off, I think, a really over-the-top summer. In Leo, Venus will aspect the Saturn-Uranus square. It's all in fixed signs. So it's going to feel like a period of really major reaction against the pandemic, against the political climate, and I think people will express themselves mainly by extreme partying. That's my prediction. All right, so to summarize June, I would say that larger forces will be getting riled up again, as indicated by Saturn square Uranus, while the social forces of Saturn and Jupiter are momentarily hibernating. So this is a momentary sort of pause in the state of affairs. So this month is going to feel a little bit anarchic, and I think this summer as well. It's going to change by the time the year ends, but that's kind of the vibe that we're in right now. All right, if you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to subscribe. You'll get notified of future videos on your YouTube channel. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.